the role of marketing is it's the tip of the sales spear. And I loved the, I guess, imagery that connotes. And taking that a step farther, if marketing in that sphere is not hitting its target, sales will not obviously hit their targets. And as an investment banker, what that means. We all know in business what that means.
Welcome to our middle market moment, where we speak with other professionals who help business owners build value, de-risk their companies, and prepare both personally and professionally to do the deal of a lifetime through M&A. And today I want to welcome Michael Shepard, who is the managing partner of the Shepard Group. And Michael's firm provides fractional chief marketing officer services for middle market companies. Michael is a financially savvy advisor to the C-suite with extensive experience in branding and corporate communications. He's got the ability to increase enterprise value through the alignment of your brand and your communication strategy, along with your overall business and exit goals. Hi, Michael. Welcome.
Thank you, Craig. Nice to be with you this morning.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on. And I've been looking forward to today's discussion. You and I have known each other for a while now, and I suppose we should, in full disclosure, let our audience know that we've sat on a board together, and it's always great to see you and welcome.
Well, likewise, great deal of admiration and respect for what you do in your space, and we've had over our time together some good discussions around the role of marketing and how it adds value.
Absolutely. Well, I want to jump right into that topic. Our audience, as you know, is mostly middle market CEOs and entrepreneurs. We also have private equity increasingly tuning in. And I think today this is going to be really valuable because we talk a lot about the mechanics of building value and kind of the constructs around that. But I almost think that marketing is really the most underutilized lever when companies go to tell their story and indeed build value. So maybe you can set kind of a framework for us around how marketing helps companies build value.
Yeah, I to kind of dive into this topic, I am reminded of something a chief financial officer told me years ago. It really stuck in my mind because, as marketers, we can talk about our craft, forever. But when you hear the perspective from somebody coming from corporate finance, it's a little bit sometimes different. And the way that he characterized the role of marketing is it's the tip of the sales spear. And I loved the, I guess, imagery that connotes. And taking that a step farther, if marketing in that sphere is not hitting its target, sales will not obviously hit their targets. And as an investment banker, what that means. We all know in business what that means. And so this relationship, this symbiotic relationship between marketing and sales is really important. And the role that we play, if you will, in creating a predisposition for the buyer to want to engage and ultimately purchase a product or service is critical. And there are many aspects of it, but I mean, fundamentally, at the end of the day, marketing is about a process that you go through that ultimately results in a successful transaction. And years ago, you may remember this from your college days, and our audience will perhaps recall the four P's. I think Procter and Gamble, they're generally credited for this in the consumer packaged goods space. But there were the four famous P's. There was product development, There was place, which refers to distribution, how you're going to take that product to market. There was price and the strategies around that in terms of how price leads to again an inclination to want to buy the product, and then of course promotion, the fourth P. And as a branding specialist, as a marketing specialist in this space, that's where we spend most of our time. But we need to, as marketers, as branding experts, need to understand those other three Ps very well. I mean, you can't leverage things promotionally if you're not dialed in with regards to strategies around product, around place, and around price. And one of the things that we sometimes have to do with our clients is take them back a bit before we go forward. They'll oftentimes come to us and they'll go, we're ready to go to market. We've got this great, product, service, whatever, and they've got it all figured out, or pretty much they think they do. And all that's missing in their minds is the promotion piece. And while it's clearly the biggest need, they don't realize sometimes they haven't fully baked the other parts of the pie, if you will.
Yeah, really insightful. I think, in the context of preparing to go to market, not just from a product standpoint, but to take your entire company to market. Buyers are pretty sophisticated animals, and they are really unpacking those other P's, if you will, and really wanting to understand what drives earnings and what drives growth in the business. So maybe you could spend a minute, unpacking that a little bit further, because really, if I'm a CEO, and I deal with these myself, right? The increasing complexity of marketing communications and technologies, right? Entrepreneurs have never had more to deal with, right, in terms of keeping track of all those things. So maybe from a marketing and storytelling standpoint, how do you unpack that with clients, and how do you help them develop a fulsome strategy, not just, hit the promotion button multiple times, right?
Right.
How do you do that?
Right. Well, and not surprisingly, that starts with good research and good data around where the company is, within its marketplace. And, we look at that through both a qualitative and a quantitative lens. I mean, we'll look at primary data, which refers to, the data that the company itself has gathered. And then we'll look at secondary market data. And obviously people in the corporate finance space understand that there are reams of that, material out there, but we attempt to really dial in exactly where the company is, inside the marketplace, and then once we have that, reasonably, detailed or fleshed out, if you will, then of course it gets into how do we start to tell this story, and the best word that I have around that. And this goes back to my earliest days when I started my career as a journalist. I think of the narrative surrounding the brand because that's what a story is. It's a narrative. And it's a narrative based on, a number of, discrete developments, distinct developments that happen over a series of time, and you start to look at those and how they form the narrative surrounding that brand, and they're likely while a prospective buyer isn't necessarily and probably won't know what some of those key points along the way, along the continuum are, together they form some kind of a narrative in their mind. Now, maybe the narrative the buyer holds isn't the correct one, or it's slightly askew. It may look at one aspect of that company and maybe overvalue that and undervalue something else. But so what we try to do is understand, and what we'll take through our discovery process, we'll take the client and we'll take a look. What are some of the key inflection points along your journey? where things really started to change or move in a particular direction? What happened? And as part of that, sometimes in between or even at those inflection points, the the things that happen aren't necessarily positive. Sometimes there's setbacks,
Mhm.
sometimes there's defeats. And yet, from a storytelling perspective, that makes it more authentic, more rich, more consumable, if you will, and
Yeah.
more resonant with the buyer. I don't think anything puts us off more in the transaction process than when we're just fed a steady series of data points and information that just suggests that it's just been up and up and up and up and up. It's the
Mhm.
hockey stick,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And I, I don't think that's a very credible narrative. I don't
Mm.
think that buyers, buy that. If anything, it probably puts more scrutiny on the company, and certainly, I think you could attest to this better than I. Diligence becomes much more difficult, for the company. So that's a really critical aspect of storytelling.
Yeah, that's excellent. Buyers don't suffer surprises very well, and every company has warts. So you're always better off disclosing those. But to your point, doing it in an authentic way and in a way that shows learning, right? How did we take that adversity or that issue and turn it into something that either de-risks the company or further prepares our management team to deal with other challenges? So that's a great word. We didn't talk about this before, but a colleague of ours did a survey, and that survey asked three stakeholders: sellers, investment bankers, and buyers. What's the most important thing when looking at a company and deciding to buy a company? And so the entrepreneurs and CEOs identified growth as the highest order, right?
Mm-hmm.
Investment bankers identified quality of earnings, right? Will
Mm-hmm.
the earnings withstand a deal?
Right.
But interestingly, buyers identified that company differentiation because they want some hook, some angle, some differentiator to be able to grow the business and be able to create earnings and win disproportionately in the marketplace.
Sure.
So maybe I know we're going a little bit off script here, but how do you take or really flesh out a company's differentiators and almost create that narrative for the executive team to be able to kind of hammer that out? Because you're absolutely right. Buyers think of a company in a certain way, but oftentimes once they get into diligence and they discover it, we can save them a lot of time by really having not only great data but also narrative around differentiation. Maybe you can share some thoughts there.
The magic around that, not surprisingly, occurs during what we call our discovery process and the research, and that will typically involve a series of in-depth interviews, both internally with company management, with operations people, depending on I guess the secrecy, if you will, of
Mm-hmm.
preparing a company for sale, and clearly there's also external interviews that happen, and we learn a great deal about differentiators as a part of that, and we can also show by looking internally and externally, we can show pretty vividly to the seller where there may be disconnects in how they see their brand, how they see their company, how they value the company, how they describe and position the company versus the way it's actually perceived in the marketplace. But to really get to the core or the essence of your question, taking the deep dive into operations is absolutely paramount importance if, as marketers, we fully understand what it is that separates that company, and therefore from that be able to articulate pretty specifically and in a very compelling way what separates them from others. We oftentimes have to with companies where there's a marketing director inside, the marketing director may have some reluctance about taking too deep of a dive into the operational side because they're fearful, well, we're going to get too technical. The buyer won't understand it. And that's, I think, somewhat misguided, because our role is to be able to understand the technical deeply enough, not necessarily, I'll use a real simple example, not to the level an engineer would, but we can and must be able to understand those processes well enough to be able to pull out from there and then figure out, okay, how do we translate this for the
Mm.
non-technical buyer? But if you don't understand what that engineer or that operational expert is doing, or what they're doing, for example, in a manufacturing context with how they're managing their inventory. Some of the if it's I use an example of ours, a packaging company, and understanding what makes their ink application process unique. You're not going to be able to understand maybe a key differentiator as it relates to quality control that you can articulate and present
Mm.
to a prospective buyer. This and that is why I think there's far too much marketing and communication today that sounds the same. It's because I don't feel that they've taken the deep enough dive to be able to pull out those pearls and nuggets that you can get when you go down a little bit deeper.
That's brilliant, because I often find sellers have what is the curse of knowledge. They know so much about their business and so much of their industry, they gloss over many of the building blocks that in a buyer's mind they need to connect and start with the foundation and put those blocks on top of each other. Yeah, that's brilliant. And helping those subject matter experts that have been in their industry for 30, 40 years to really deliver that message can be the difference between a deal and no deal, right? You have to be able to connect those dots for them. Certainly, as investment bankers, we try to do that, but oftentimes we lean on our marketing friends to coach us up as well. So that's brilliant word. Wanted to, you touched on the tools, the data, and the analytics. Here's a pain point. A lot of CEOs and entrepreneurs do rely on that marketing manager or somebody internally to really understand all of their data and analytics and platforms. And we find that most people use platforms and their tools to about 50% of their efficacy, right? And then they're off to the next platform. But the good news is that a lot of the data driven and today's digital driven marketing comes with verifiable ROI, right? We're working
Right.
with an e-commerce client. It's pretty simple, right? Here's our ad spend, here's the sales from the campaign, here's our cost of acquisition. A lot of that data can almost reverse the age old adage that up to 50% of marketing spend is not effective, but the question is which 50%, right? So the world is becoming more data centric, and even for buyers, they may not understand all of the marketing, but boy do they understand data. So how do you work with sellers to take that data and turn it into a story?
That is a deep question. It's an excellent question, and the short answer is you use the data. We start with understanding the operations of the business better. I mean that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And so when we're looking at the metrics around traffic around a website, or we're looking at social, or we're looking at email analytics, we are looking at those data points, but we're tying it back to communications around something that the company has been saying, that supports what they're doing operationally. And so we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at, what how resonant was that particular communication, and if it was less resonant, as evidenced by the amount of engagement that we got with with the audience. Why was that? Is it the topic or the subject matter that's was the audience maybe not the correct, or did there need to be a tweak that needed to be made there? Data, as you know, can tell a lot of different stories, but what we are sensitive to at our firm is trying to make sure that whatever data that we are pulling out of the tech stack, if you will, these platforms, is data that is most actionable from an operation standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, in
Mhm.
building the brand. I can't tell you how non-helpful it often is to a CEO to have a discussion that lasts more than 35 seconds around click-through rates on an email and what 13 basis points difference may mean between one email and another. I mean, we're that's really taking this down to an extremely granular level, but that's not really what the CEO wants or needs to hear. That
Mhm.
that information can tell a marketer, okay, this message performed in whatever fashion it performed, but what we need to do is marketers step back and say, well, how does that relate to what we are trying to do with the company in terms of growing a particular line of business? How is it supporting our broader goals around a story and a narrative that we want to share and utilize for this company? That's what where data and your focus on the data needs to be. If you don't have that discipline, Craig, what happens is you're chasing your tail and you're drowning in the data. And you see this now,
Mhm.
happening with and as much as we all might love and be excited about what artificial intelligence can do and so forth, at the end of the day, that's aggregation of data using these large language models. But the 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 dangers of drowning in data have arguably never been greater. And
Mhm.
so I go back to the word discipline. I think you, as a marketer, it's incumbent upon you to understand what's important to the C-suite and what's important from an operational, what helps them, make better decisions with regard to operations, to sales, to the narrative, the story around the company. That's how
Mhm.
I would answer that.
Yeah, terrific. And I know this is we could talk each one of these topics we could do a whole separate episode on, and I just want to touch upon it. We'll talk a little bit pre-sale and then maybe post-sale, how your company helps, from a PR standpoint with announcing, an acquisition and the like. But
Mm-hmm.
pre-sale, there are certain, and again, a whole discipline around reputational management. And there are some companies that need reputational management that are trying to go to sale. But for the most part, do you have kind of a thought around increasing the awareness pre-sale, or some of the things that a company should do to make sure that when the buyer does a Google search, right, that they're seeing good, positive, active thought leadership, or even just commenting on social that shows they're a relevant
Mm-hmm.
brand? You recommend kind of a pump up the volume strategy, or what kind of thoughts do you have there, just in terms of aiding a
Yeah, no
sale?
question.
Um,
Yeah, you definitely you're looking to use social, email, web, PR. you're looking at every tool in the in the marketer's toolbox for how to amplify the good and focus on distinct points of difference that provide opportunities for exposure. What you don't want to do in marketing, for a company that knows that it's readying itself for a public announcement of sale, is just look at what I would call just sort of carpet bombing, and we need to pump up the volume. We need to go in and we need X amount of paid social. We need it becomes all about how do you saturate channels, and I think that's putting the cart before the horse. I think you really have to look at what is it that we want to say. And again, this will go back to what you've learned in your research through your SWOT analysis. What are our leverageable strengths? What are those things that we want to really drive home? And then you want to look at activities that support that. You can't just go out continually with, what I'll call pure sales messages that make claims. You want to look. This is where public relations becomes really important. You want to look. The goal is to be able to get exposure on third-party platforms. You want and the exposure that comes from appearing, on panels and or in industry forums where, your brand is significant enough and your perspective and point of view is important enough where, you are out there and visible, with prospective would-be buyers. And so it's not just simply, if you will, putting more gunpowder in. You have to as it relates to the paid. We work in three areas in media. We work in owned, which is all of the channels that you control. We work in earned media, which is that third party media. It comes from newspapers, magazines, blogs, influential platforms that are published outside of your control. And then the third leg of the stool is paid, which is where you are buying that exposure. And sometimes these two, paid and earned, work together, where you can create opportunities for more exposure on an earned platform by seeding that with paid media. And what we try to do, and this is where public relations training and specialization helps you, you want to try to create some separation between the two. You want the visibility, but you don't want necessarily your content to look like it's bought and paid for. We're not necessarily big fans of that. In the old days, we used to call that advertorial, but it's, yeah. I just think in today's world, buyers are too discerning. I just don't think it has much gravitas with them.
Yeah, great point. And I love the way you break that down between the three areas and thinking about the overlap of coverage, if you will, but the novelty of each approach and message. That's powerful. And, ultimately, and just to kind of put my buyer hat on for a minute, one of the main sourcing activities of buyers is to look at who's going to trade shows, who's sitting on panels, who's the thought leader in the industry as a method of differentiation, right? If you're just a Me Too and you're not participating in those things, that is a gating element for buyers as well. So getting yourself invited on podcasts or getting yourself a panelist role if you're a seller, let the world see you, be seen and be heard. And that could be the difference between having somebody find you in the marketplace and deem you to be acquirable, if you will. So that's a great word as well.
I couldn't agree more.
Let's turn our. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I couldn't
Michael.
agree more with you, and I'm just going to say, I would never demean the value of paid advertising exposure because, let's face it, being top of mind is extremely important. We live and operate and work in such a competitive world, in business. out of sight is today out of mind. And at the end of the day, we know from research that people buy from brands that they know and they trust, and advertising is a part of that. And whether it's through paid social, whether it's through retargeting that you're doing digitally, another digital advertising, or good old fashioned print advertising. And let me, if I may, just briefly mention that, to paraphrase, I think it was George Bernard Shaw once said, the reports of my demise are greatly exaggerated.
Mm,
I think that print advertising has suffered a bit from that. We have seen it through our own research. We there's industry research that's been done, the secondary market around this. There is still a great deal of stopping power with print advertising that digital does not have. The trade-off, of course, is you don't have the trackability associated with print. But there is a reason that advertisers spend the money that they will on the production and the creative of great looking, powerful, rich in color and vibrancy advertising in magazines, because it will stop somebody and they'll look at it and look at it, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, when you've done that, you've you've accomplished something very significant. So, I hear too many people, and some of this is demographic, particularly for digital natives that have grown up, with in the world of the web and social, that print is for dinosaurs. It's not going away. It's certainly a lesser part of the smaller part of the equation now, but it is still critical in many respects.
yeah, absolutely. I have a friend who is with owns Premier Media, which locally you would know the brands 425, South Sound Magazine, South Sound Business, 425 Business, and they have a travel magazine. And what he shares with me too is there's a different mindset when you're sitting down and looking at a lifestyle publication versus you're going to Google looking for a quick set of quick education, if you will, on researching something, and really tapping into that mindset seems to make sense relative to the print spend. He's doing great, and so I can testify that print is not dead. It's one of the tools in the toolbox. So for sure. Well, I wanted to turn our attention, maybe as a last question. We get through a sale process, and we have private equity listeners that are looking at their value creation plan and really getting educated, if you will, on the role of marketing as it relates to post sale.
Mm-hmm.
And not only do sellers want to make sure their clients and their employees understand the transaction, the benefits of the sale to an institutional capital player, but how is it best to manage those communications and PR both externally and internally on an acquisition? I know you're pretty steeped in this because one of your clients is ACG, the Association of Corporate Growth. So you kind of understand both sides of the world, both middle market entrepreneurial led
Sure.
companies as well as the buy side. So how do you play a role, perhaps for those companies and private equity in terms of appropriately messaging and making sure that that transition goes smoothly in the marketplace relative to that acquisition?
Great question, and a good topic to end on. I think the most important constituency that you look at post acquisition uh, are those internal stakeholders. The employees are incredibly important, and I think there's also the by extension, you've got vendor relationships, you've got a number of
Mm,
people that interface with that company. That, let's face it, change is very difficult for some people to accept that, and there's just anxiety around it. Like, well, what happens now? Am I still going to be dealing with the
Mhm.
same, the same boss? I mean, will the reporting line of command change? I mean, how does this impact me? And so, what we do is make sure that we do the interviews that are necessary with management, understand how those lines of communication are currently working, and then what we will do is spend a lot of times crafting pretty detailed FAQs, where
Mhm.
we will try to anticipate from every audience that we're looking at what are the questions that they have surrounding the change, the transition, and really, this is a form of creativity where you have to put yourself in the position of, okay, I know what the company is doing and why they're doing it and what it means from a an acquisitive standpoint and from a financial standpoint, but let's look at it now from through another lens. And so what are the questions that they're going to have? Because at the end of the day, those are the first, if you will, ambassadors for that company. They are, I mean, they're going to be going out to market with your message, but while you in
Mhm.
marketing may be thinking about what do we need to say to this audience externally, and you know understand that those employees are going out of your building every day. I mean, maybe not in the hybrid, or remote working model and world we live in today, but they are interfacing with people all over the place, and they need to understand exactly what's happening, what's happened, why it has happened, and be able to ultimately understand it, get excited about it, and be able to share that, with their networks, if you will. And so we take that process. We do that both internally and externally post transactions. The first thing that we do, let's make sure everybody understands why we did this. The worst thing you want are people speculating. And
Mhm.
Greg, you probably know this from your experience. It is sometimes shocking what types of perceptions and thoughts go through someone's head post transition and what this means. There are
Yeah.
doomsday scenarios that people will formulate in their head. They'll share that. You want, through education and empathy, your communications have to have an appropriate amount of empathy, recognizing that, hey, we know this may feel it's a new world, it's different. We respect that, and that's why we want to take extra special time to make sure you fully understand why we did this and why ultimately it's going to be a good thing for the company and for you.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I have seen people fill the void, right? If the messages aren't put out by the company and the leadership, employees and vendors and others will fill the void with their own narrative. So that can be very dangerous for sure. For sure. Well, I wish we had a little more time to dive into this kind of huge topic here, but I, for one, know that middle market firms can punch above their weight by partnering on a kind of full service, if you will, marketing strategy, and with a firm like yours, Michael. So thank you for joining us today. Maybe share with our audience how they can get in touch with you and your firm.
Right. Certainly online. We're available at theshepherdgroup.com. And I'll leave it to you, perhaps, maybe with a follow up email as to cover the spelling, because I know Shepherd can be spelled a number of different ways. But we online, we do have quite a bit of information. There's great content on our blog. In and also through insights that we shared, case studies that can provide some good information for people that want to know how we tackle the problems that they may be facing, and propose solutions.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, thank you, Michael, and thanks to everyone listening, and good luck on your journey to a deal of the lifetime.